Hello everyone, it's Joe here from Draft FPL and welcome to my full draft day strategy guide. I guarantee if you follow this strategy on your draft day for Draft FPL, you will come away with a competitive team that definitely has a good chance at taking you all the way in your draft league. Let's get started. So today we're going to be looking at my personal strategy for how I basically go about every single draft I do. I normally do 4 or 5 a year, so I've done plenty over the years, and this is a strategy I follow round by round to make sure that my team is going to be, at the very least, even with bad luck, it's going to be reasonably competitive throughout the year. There's no chance if you follow this guide you'll come away from the draft thinking, oh my god, what has just happened? How have I ended up with this team? So let's go into, first of all, the things you need to do pre-draft. So there's a couple of things I think personally you absolutely need to set up before your draft if you want to make the most of the opportunities that you've got in the draft, and that is, first of all, you definitely need a ranking of at least the total number of midfielders, defenders and forwards that will be drafted in your league. So say you're in a 10-man league, you need 50 defenders, 50 midfielders, 30 forwards, and I wouldn't worry too much about keepers at this point, but you definitely need a ranking of at least that many players, because trying to pick players on the fly during a draft is just an absolute guaranteed way to accidentally pick up players that are injured, not going to start, have terrible fixtures or whatever. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. So make sure you just sit down and make a ranking of at least that many players. Personally, I like to put the top 30 in a combined list. So that's midfielders, forwards and generally not defenders, but I like to make 3 rounds worth of picks that are combined into one list, and then from then on I'll go on positional rankings and just have them all split out. I generally think that beyond the first 3 rounds the team composition takes over a little bit, and we'll get stuck into that a little bit later in the video. I also like to have a list of teams with the best fixtures for the first sort of 5 game weeks. I think that's really helpful, and it's something a lot of people overlook, and they just go for like season long picks for the whole time. Then it comes to the game week 1 and they're like, oh, my fixtures are terrible because I've accidentally picked a load of, my 4th and 5th midfielders and defenders all had terrible fixtures and I didn't even know. So definitely a fixture list of the first 5 game weeks is really important. A goalkeeper rotation list. This is something that personally I do every single year. I like to pick 2 goalkeepers that have great rotating fixtures for the entire season, and I'll just play the one with the best chance at a clean sheet every single week. And I'm in absolutely no doubt that that is the best way to play your keepers in Draft FPL. And again, a little bit more on that in another video that's coming soon, but I'm absolutely convinced there's no one that can tell me otherwise that that's not the best way to play your goalkeepers. I also like to have the game week 1 fixtures in front of me just so I can get an idea of what my starting 11 is going to be in that first game week, so I don't have to rely on the game week 1 waivers to kind of fix an error that I've made where all of a sudden I realise that I've not got good fixtures for game week 1. I need to make some changes. Now, there will be some of you that look at that and think, yep, easy, that's something I do every year anyway, then cool. If you're looking at that and think, oh, I'm not going to do all that, then check out my Patreon, because I've just come up with basically exactly this. It's an entire draft day pack that has everything you could need: rankings, goalkeeper rotations, fixtures. It's everything you need in one draft cheat sheet. That is available for Patreon members, so check out the link down below. It's probably the best piece of content I'll make all year, the most useful thing. I don't like saying that because all my content is useful, of course, but this is probably the most useful thing that I will make, and it is available on the Patreon right now. It will auto update with my rankings and predicted lineups and stuff like that as the start of the season gets closer. So if you think you want a bit of help for draft day, that is the thing that I would recommend the absolute most. Okay, so you're all set up. Let's get stuck into the actual draft. You've got everything ready. Rounds 1 to 3 come along, and I'm going to kind of break these down to like the early rounds, the mid rounds, the late rounds. So rounds 1 to 3 are the early rounds, and it is the most important 3 rounds of the draft without a shadow of a doubt. This is where you'll kind of define your team, and it's really important that you pay close attention to who you pick and who's picked around you in these 3 rounds. So the aim of these rounds is to build a core of 3 big hitting attacking players that will hold value all season. At least one forward here is absolutely essential, and I will not pick any defenders in the first 3 rounds, especially this year where I think the defences look pretty weak outside of a couple. If you don't have a forward in the first 3 rounds, you're in big trouble, and 3 big hitting attackers will make your team look so much better. And I have had it in the past where I've drafted Trent, I've drafted Trippier in these rounds, and your team just looks so much worse for it. And as much as those players are very valuable, I just don't think they're worth it in the first 3 rounds. Having 3 attackers that you can rely on all season is just, it doesn't compare in my opinion. So round 1 specifically, this should be the quickest round in your draft. This should fly by. Every single person should know exactly who they're going to pick in round 1. It does my head in drafts when round 1 takes ages. How can you have a decision to make in round 1? Everyone makes a ranking of at least 10 players, surely. Everyone should have a full ranking of the first round, and you just pick the player, the highest ranked player that is available. There should be no decision to be made. You've had months to think about this. There's one click of a button, and that is you pick the highest available player. Do the research before the draft so that in round 1 you just click the button. There should be no thought process at all. It really should be just as simple as that. On to round 2, and this is where there's a little bit more thought involved. So I would pick the best available player in my rankings subject to the following conditions. I would draft a player of a different position to round 1. So if I've drafted a forward in the first round, I would draft a midfielder in the second round. If I've drafted a midfielder in the first round, I would take a forward in the second round. There is a slight chance I would take 2 forwards, maybe, depending on like the quality of the pick. If I'm quite late in the second round and it's quite a big gap between the best available forward and the next best mid, I might take 2 forwards. I definitely wouldn't take 2 mids, I don't think. Again, unless there's an absolute standout. You know, if you're drafted in position number 8 and you can take 2 really top tier mids, maybe I would, but 99 times out of 100 I'm going to take a midfielder and a forward in the first 2 rounds. The only caveat to that is I would skip a player if they play for the same team as a round 1 pick, and that is mainly just like hedging my bets just in case whatever team that is have an absolutely disastrous season. You really don't want to be stuck with your 2 most valuable players playing for the same team just in case they have a nightmare, and this will just stop you from having one of those absolutely disastrous seasons. So I like to personally make sure my first 2 picks don't play for the same team and aren't in the same position. This just gives you a nice well-rounded 2 big hitters to kind of rely on. So moving on to the third round, I would then pick the best available player, subject to if either of my first 2 picks are injury or rotation prone, I'd make sure I avoid picking another one of those. So say I've got someone like KDB, I then wouldn't take maybe a Diogo Jota in the third round because that's just a little bit too much risk, and I'd rather go for someone a little bit steadier, maybe like a Jared Bowen, who I know is going to play like all the time. So that's just something I'll keep my eye on. I really don't want more than, like, having one of the first 3 picks in that kind of ballpark is fine. Someone like Gakpo or Diaz, you know, having one of them is no problem. But more than one, I think the risk gets a little bit too high, and you're just hoping all season that nothing goes wrong, which isn't really a place you want to be in. So that's the early rounds done. You've got 3 big hitting attackers. You now move on to like the mid rounds, rounds 4 to 8. And it's at this point in the draft that you want to fill out your squad with strong season-long picks and avoid taking too many risks. This is still a very important period of the draft. These players are going to be with you for the majority of the season if everything goes well. So you do want to make sure you're picking really solid players that aren't going to cause you too many problems, too many headaches down the line. So during this period, I like to by the end of round 8, I like to make sure I've got 2 premium defenders, and I would say that a premium defender is someone that plays for one of the top defences or plays for a good defence and has a lot of attacking threat. So we're looking at Arsenal defenders, City defenders, and then the likes of Pedro Porro, Trippier, like the top attacking boys. I like to take 2 of those, Liverpool defenders as well, I'd put in that category. If you've got 2 of those, that's great. You can leave them in, week out for basically the whole season. So 2 of those by round 8. I'd like to have 2 forwards as well in this period, because I think if you've got 2 forwards by round 8, you're pretty much guaranteed to have 2 starters, and at least 2 starting forwards is a massive bonus, because there aren't that many starting forwards to go around. So if you're in a 10-man league, then you've probably got the strongest front line if you've got 2 forwards by the end of round 8. Obviously, if everyone does this, then it makes it a little bit trickier, but most people will look at the forwards that are available in like the 7th round and think, they're rubbish, I can get them later on, when actually you can't, because they will go. So taking someone like Adam Armstrong in the 8th round, a lot of people will look at that and think, I'm not sure, that might be a bit too early. But having a nailed on forward is a massive benefit, because as I said, you will be stuck with a dud on your bench otherwise. I almost certainly won't have picked a goalkeeper by the end of the 8th round, and I like to pick no more than 1 player that's ruled out in game week 1. So there will be players that have played in the Euros that will come back late. There'll be players with like injury niggles, suspensions, someone like Reece James suspended for the first few games. I don't like to have any more than 1 player that won't play in game week 1, because it's too much risk to try and manage, especially if it's like an injury thing, because you don't really know how long they're going to be out for at this time. So no more than 1 player that's not going to play in game week 1, 2 premium defenders, 2 forwards, and the rest midfielders generally. So in the next set of rounds 9 to 12, now is the time to look at your squad as a whole and fill in the gaps as needed. These rounds aren't quite as important, but it is still important to get off to a strong start. So the priority list I look for is, if my game week 1 fixtures look weak, then I'll focus on a midfielder or a defender that have a really good game week 1 fixture. If I look good for game week 1, I would then look at players that have a decent run for the first 5 game weeks. So in my draft pack, I've got them ranked by fixture difficulty, and I'll just look at the top few teams, take a couple of players from there, because they're the ones that value is likely to stay high. If I do end up going for a trade, they're players that have probably scored a lot of points in the first few weeks because of the good fixtures. So I might be able to get a bit of value out of that on the trade market. And I would consider picking my first keeper in here if my squad looks strong. I prioritise the best keeper available from my rotation list, and as I said earlier, in that pack there is a big list of every single goalkeeper rotation available, which are the strongest throughout the entire season. So by the end of round 12, I've almost certainly got all my mids, a couple of forwards, a few defenders, and maybe a goalkeeper. So it's just a few more picks to finish off with. So the last few rounds in this, I'll grab a second keeper that fits a good rotation with my first keeper, an attacking punt that has high upside if they get the minutes, and then defenders with good fixtures. So someone that, if I've got 1 more attacker left to pick, I'll normally just go for someone that's just an absolute gamble, because there's a high chance that the rest of my team have got decent fixtures or are decent solid picks for game week 1 that I'm going to play anyway. This is someone that I'm happy to bench, and if they play, they could then become a better pick a little bit further on. Another decent tactic with this attacking punt is someone that you could potentially be getting a transfer to a different team. So like last season, I took Eddie Nketiah in this slot in the hopes that he got moved to Palace, because I think that would have made him a really good pick. It didn't happen in the end, and I kept him for a bit and then dropped him. But this is someone you're probably going to waiver out if it doesn't pay off, and that's not an issue. But really all you're trying to do in these rounds is make sure you've got enough risk with enough solid picks. So if you've already got a couple of risky picks, I would probably skip the attacking punt and just pick someone really solid that's definitely going to play. just to make sure you've got enough coverage for the first few game weeks. And that kind of wraps it up really. So this isn't the only way to play draft, but this is the way that I go about every single draft that I do. And to be honest, it kind of you always come out with a decent team. It might not be the best team possible, and that just depends on where you are in the draft order. Sometimes you get a spot which just doesn't help you out, but if you follow this guide, you will, I guarantee that you will get at least a decent team, a team that other people in the league look at and go, oh yeah, that looks strong, because this is just a way to prioritize the right picks at the right time in the draft to make sure that you do at least decently well. So if you enjoy the video, thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I've got the full mock draft, the big one, coming up in the next week or so, so make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification button to make sure you don't miss anything from me. Subscribe to the Patreon, and we will see you next time.